So when we're talking about crossing the chasm and traversing the traction gap and how they're both playbooks for startup ventures, a lot of people want to know what's the difference between the two. Crossing the chasm takes a market-in view of the challenge, meaning how do you get your customers and partners to adopt a new technology? So it's oriented toward, we call it market development strategy. Traversing the traction gap looks at the same journey from the point of view of an investor. So what do you have to do along that journey in order to secure support from your investor at each stage? So both are journeys, both have different changes of state during the journey, but one's customer-centric and one is investor-centric. So the big idea behind crossing the chasm is when you introduce a disruptive technology into a market, there are early adopters who believe what you believe. And you have kind of a wonderful love affair. It's very exciting. And everybody sees the upside of everything. And then you kind of hit a wall because you run out of early adopters. And most people do not believe what you believe. You're a disruptive influence, right? So the question is, how would you ever get to the rest of the marketplace? And what we learned is that on the other side of that chasm, people are pragmatic rather than believer. They're not skeptical, but they're just like, you have to show me a reason to do it now. Pragmatists are going, I'm going to use it when I see other people doing it. Okay. And you realize, well, but why would I go first? And the answer is you'd only go first if you have a problem you can't solve with your current solution set. So we call them pragmatists in pain. And the idea was target a segment of pragmatists in pain and use your technology to solve a problem that they cannot solve today. So we ended up saying the early adopters believe what you believe, the pragmatists in pain need what you have. But you better have the whole solution to their problem, not just a little bit of it. So that the whole idea, the other idea of crossing the chasm was, we called it the whole product. You can't just have a good product, you have to have the whole product. And those are the core ideas behind crossing the chasm. So when you bring the traction gap into the equation, the idea now is, in order to make this journey of crossing the chasm, I have to be funded. Right. And so, well, why would an investor give me money? What you learn about venture investing is that venture investing has, I kind of think of them as like quantum jumps of valuation. That is to say, if I give you some money and you spend it, and the question is, when you're done spending it, I have to believe that your company's going to be worth more money now than it was then, because when you raise the next amount of money, I need you to raise it at a higher valuation. Well, it turns out with venture investing, there are these incremental places where your valuation jumps. And that's what the traction gap calls out. So there are 5 inflection points in the traction gap. The first one is actually to get your very first seed investment. We call it minimum viable category. That means you better have a category that if you're successful, people believe that could generate a lot of money. So that's the first, that gets you your first dollars. The next one is called initial product release. When you do initial product release, what you do is you take technology risk off the table. You said, I've proven I can build a product. Don't know if anybody wants it, but at least I can build it, okay? Well, but that's worth something, so I'll give you a little bit more money for that one. The next one's called minimum viable product. That's the one which you use to work with customers to say, can I get product market fit? And the key to the minimum viable product, it's the closest one to crossing the chasm, because you used your initial product release with your early adopters, but the minimum viable product is, okay, but do I have a use case that can create a repeatable business on the other side of the chasm? That takes a lot of market risk off the table, okay? And that's a big deal. Then you go from minimum viable product to minimum viable repeatability or minimum viable revenue. And what that's about is, can you show me now that you can scale your market beyond that initial use case, beyond those initial pragmatists in pain, into broader and broader market segments? And if you can, again, I'm going, wow, this is worth a lot more. You're not just a one-trick pony. There's a lot of stuff here. And then the final one is the move to minimum viable scalability. Do you have enough systems and capability in place to go the distance? And I think what's important about minimum viable product, now at Wildcat, we do a lot of business-to-business investing as opposed to business-to-consumer. So the churn is not as big a problem, but what's key to that crossing the chasm use case, which is the minimum viable product market fit, is you find a community of people who want to commit to this solution long term. And that makes investors realize, well, even if you never get another market, you've now got a beachhead that will keep you in business for a long time to come, because you're doing something that's life-supporting to them, and they're not going to let you go out of business anytime soon. It doesn't solve for the upside, but it takes a lot of the downside off the table. That's why it's valuable. I think the big idea is that this was so amazing, because I've worked with entrepreneurs now for 20, 30 years on this crossing the chasm stuff. And we had all these great dialogues about understanding the customer and why with the partners. We never had a very good framework for the investors. Right. And so, and if you're an entrepreneur, the whole venture investing thing is opaque and it's mysterious and it's kind of disturbing. So what the traction gap does is it gets the entrepreneur aligned with the investor. And all of a sudden the entrepreneur can say, oh, I see what's going on. If I take this money from them and I spend it as best I can, but I don't change the valuation of my company, then when I go to raise my next round, I'm going to get diluted out of my ownership because I didn't get to that next level. And it's not obvious that if you got halfway, you'd say, well, if I got halfway, I should get half credit. No. It's a little bit like jumping across a cliff. Getting halfway does not do it for you. You have to get all the way to the next state before you get the valuation credit. And if you don't get the valuation credit, you get diluted. That felt like a very unfair thing to a lot of entrepreneurs. But once you explain them this quantum idea, they go, oh, I see. So this is an important idea. Do you build the company for you? Do you build the company for the investor? Actually, my first recommendation is build the company for your customer. And so if you build the company for your customer, and that's where the crossing the chasm stuff plays in a lot. But you say, but I need money to build the company for the customer. Okay, well, now you're taking on the venture investor. So now you have to have a secondary interest in making sure you meet their needs as well. But you're serving the customer, and you're qualifying yourself as for the investor. It's really cool. So as a venture partner at Wildcat, I get to use both frameworks depending on where we are. And both of them have this wonderfully fulfilling a thing of having a framework create an aha moment. Because you're in the middle of being an entrepreneurial person. Your head's down. You're in the dark most of the time, frankly. So we get to pop up and say, for today, let's see if we can put some perspective on what you've been going through for the last 6 months. And it's always some level of challenges that's just like superhuman to overcome, right? So, but the challenges tend to fall into two interesting paths. One is, how in the world do I get the world to accept me? And the other is, how in the world do I get the next round of funding raised? And they both can seem very mysterious to groups, because what the people wanted to do initially was build this wonderful, incredible thing. And yes, that's great, but if you don't have customers, it's not good. If you don't have investors, it's not good. So what's fun about frameworks is to watch really intelligent people who tend to be engineering oriented. And what the framework lets them realize is, you can engineer a market. Wow, that's pretty cool. You can engineer an investment. Oh, that's pretty cool. So watching the engineering imagination say, oh, this is kind of like a system. I understand systems. I build systems, right? As opposed to marketing as some romance exercise that I don't understand, and investors is completely complete mystery to me. So that's what's fun. Well, this is the bet about Wildcat. We think this is totally game-changing, and in fact, my career has said to me that when you get an entrepreneur properly aligned, they are a force of nature. So if you know how to pick good entrepreneurs, and I would say not all, but many investors do, then the issue is how do you keep them aligned and moving forward? And I think both of these frameworks, what they do, they don't solve the problem so much as they keep them from going in the wrong direction. So you still have to go correctly in the right direction, but there's just so much. If you don't have these frameworks, you can wander around a long time experimenting, and it wastes money, and it also eventually your own employees lose patience with you. So I think just making sure that your efforts are powerfully directed toward these outcomes for the customer and for the investor, I think it's just transformative.